The night air over the Tigris smells of wet clay and burning pitch. Torches spit and hiss against the rain as a column of prisoners is dragged through the colossal Ishtar Gate of Nineveh. At the head of the line walks a king, robes soaked, eyes like sharpened obsidian. This is Ashurbanipal, the last great ruler of the Neo-Assyrian Empire. And this is the city the ancient world learned to fear, a city where walls spoke in carved stone, where streams became policy, and where terror itself was the language of government. Pause and imagine it. Fortifications stretching for miles, palaces larger than modern stadiums, and reliefs thousands of feet of carved alabaster depicting flaying, impalement, and the dismemberment of those who dared defy the Assyrian throne. This was not random cruelty, it was strategy, and tonight we walk those blood-slit corridors of power. 2,500 years ago, the Assyrians controlled nearly everything between the Mediterranean and the Persian Gulf. Under kings like Tiglath-Pileser III, Sargon II, and Sennacherib, the empire perfected the art of administrative fear. They believed that a single unforgettable punishment could prevent 100 future rebellions. It worked. Cities that heard of Assyrian methods often surrendered without a fight. Their message was carved in stone and baked in clay. Resist, and you will suffer beyond imagination. The Assyrians even had a word for it, shulmu, peace through overwhelming terror. Conquest wasn't just about armies, it was about psychology. Among their most infamous tactics was flaying, removing the skin of captured leaders and nailing it to the city gates. Royal inscriptions brag without shame. I flayed the rebel chief and spread his skin upon the wall of his city. These were not whispered threats, they were official press releases. Palace couriers carried clay tablets describing each execution to distant provinces, ensuring the story of Nineveh's cruelty arrived long before its armies. Yet for the Assyrians, this was not sadism for pleasure. It was policy. A single public flaying might pacify an entire region for decades. Fear, they understood, was cheaper than war. Step inside the southwest palace of Sennacherib, and the walls themselves become executioners. Bas-reliefs stretch hundreds of feet, showing soldiers carrying severed heads like trophies, captives stretched across stakes, and entire cities burning as women and children are marched into exile. Every visiting envoy, every nervous ambassador was forced to walk these corridors before meeting the king. It was a silent conversation. Look upon these stones and decide whether you will obey. Archaeologists in the 19th century were horrified when they unearthed these slabs. The carvings were so detailed that early scholars doubted they were real history. But the cuneiform texts matched the art word for word. Conquest was only the beginning. The Assyrians mastered mass deportation, moving entire populations hundreds of miles to break their cultural identity. A rebellious city might see every man, woman, and child marched across deserts to a new settlement, their old home repopulated with strangers loyal to Nineveh. Royal scribes recorded exact head counts and routes, as if fear could be measured like grain. To those left behind, the message was unmistakable. Resist, and you will suffer beyond imagination. The Assyrians even had a word for it, shulmu, peace through overwhelming terror. Conquest wasn't just about armies, it was about psychology. At the center of this empire stood Ashurbanipal, a man who combined brutal warfare with scholarly obsession. He collected thousands of clay tablets to create the world's first great library. Yet those same tablets proudly described the torment of captured kings. One inscription reads, "I tore out their tongues and smashed their cities like pots." To Ashurbanipal, literature and terror were not contradictions. They were two sides of the same divine mission. But terror did not stop at the empire's borders. Inside the gilded halls of Nineveh, royal officials, generals, even family members lived under the same shadow. A careless word could be read as treason. A delayed tribute could mean public humiliation or death. The king's harem, home to queens, concubines, and political hostages, was a place of velvet curtains and constant surveillance. Here, behind carved cedar doors, ambition could be rewarded with jewels or punished with exile to the weaving houses, a polite term for prisons where noble women worked until they died. And yet, the most chilling punishments were reserved not for soldiers or foreign kings, but for those who shared the Assyrian bloodline. Behind the massive gates of Nineveh, queens plotted, priests whispered, and rivals disappeared without a trace. In the next episode, we step deeper into the ritual of punishment, where royal women, governors, and even prophets learned that in the Neo-Assyrian Empire, terror was not only policy, it was religion. Stay with us for part 2 of the Flaying Fields of Nineveh, where the palace doors open to reveal punishments so calculated, so ceremonially cruel, that even the conquerors of Nineveh would one day whisper their names with fear.
The moon rises over the blackened walls of Nineveh. The air is heavy with incense and the sour tang of fear. Inside the great palace, silk curtains shiver in the desert wind as a single bronze gong announces the beginning of a royal judgment. Courtiers bow low, their eyes fixed on the stone floor. Tonight, the punishment will not be carried out on a distant rebel or a conquered king. Tonight, the terror is aimed inward, at those who share Assyrian blood. Ashurbanipal sits on his throne of cedar and ivory, a figure carved from shadow. His eyes are fixed on the prisoner before him, a governor accused of plotting with Babylon. No trial in Nineveh is ever private. Officials, priests, and soldiers stand shoulder to shoulder, their silence more dangerous than any shouted verdict. The king's voice carries across the chamber, calm and precise, describing each charge. When he finishes, the sentence is not debated. It is delivered like a prayer. The governor is led away to a courtyard where the crowd will watch his fate unfold. For the Neo-Assyrians, punishment was not merely a response to crime, it was a ritual of state. Captives were displayed in processions that wound through the gates of Nineveh, past walls carved with scenes of earlier executions. Flaying, impalement, blinding, and the cutting of tongues were not hidden acts of cruelty, they were public performances. Priests chanted curses, soldiers recited the king's victories, and scribes etched details into wet clay tablets to be copied and sent across the empire. Fear was not only inflicted, it was documented and exported. Royal women were not spared. Queens who overstepped their influence or concubines accused of conspiracy faced punishments designed to humiliate as much as to harm. Some were stripped of rank and sent to weaving houses, laboring in isolation until death erased their names from memory. Others were drowned in sacred rivers or burned in ceremonial pits dedicated to the gods. These acts were presented as offerings, proof that the king ruled with divine approval. To defy Ashurbanipal was to defy the gods themselves. Even within the harem, where velvet cushions and gold ornaments suggested luxury, terror whispered through every corridor. Servants carried messages at night, doors creaked under secret knocks, and a single rumor could bring soldiers crashing through carved cedar gates. The women of the palace lived in a world where affection and annihilation were separated by a single breath. Outside the city, the machinery of fear continued its endless grind. Entire populations were uprooted and marched to distant provinces. Fields of impaled rebels stood like forests of warning beside the royal highways. Travelers approaching Nineveh saw not banners of welcome, but the bodies of those who had failed to obey. These displays were as carefully arranged as any festival, designed to burn a single message into the mind. The king's will is law, and terror is the price of defiance. But empires built on fear eventually breed enemies even more determined than the subjects they once ruled. In 612 BCE, a coalition of Babylonians, Medes, and Scythians descended on Nineveh. For 3 months, the greatest fortress of the ancient world resisted, its walls echoing with the same screams it had once imposed on others.
When the defenses finally fell, fire consumed the palaces and libraries. The stones that had displayed flayed skins now cracked and tumbled into ash. The empire that had terrified a continent vanished almost overnight. Today, the ruins of Nineveh lie silent on the plains of northern Iraq. Wind whistles through broken gates where once the cries of the condemned carried across the Tigris. Archaeologists sift through fragments of alabaster panels, still sharp with images of torture and triumph. Clay tablets from Ashurbanipal's library speak with chilling pride of the punishments that once maintained order. The terror that once shook kings and kingdoms is reduced to dust and echoes, but the lessons remain. Fear can build an empire, but it cannot preserve one. The very cruelty that secured Assyria's power also united its enemies and hastened its destruction. As you listen to the stones of Nineveh, remember that even the mightiest rulers eventually face the silence of time. If the dark corridors of forgotten empires intrigue you, if you want to hear the whispers of those who lived and died beneath the shadow of absolute power, subscribe to Empire of Dread and join us as we uncover more truths buried in blood and clay. History's darkest corners are never truly silent. They are waiting for someone brave enough to listen.